Live.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us at this NASFiC panel, which is Imaginary Book Club. For the next few minutes, I'm going to be saying things that are true, and all of us will be saying things that are true. And then the veil of acting will descend because this is a comedy panel where we review and talk about books that do not actually exist. So we're going to be making jokes. I hope that they're fun for everybody. And I'm going to first off introduce all of our participants. I was almost just going to say contestants. This is not a game show. It's just supposed to be not as fun as one. And we'll start with Julia. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hi, I'm Julia Rios. I'm a writer, an editor, a podcaster, and a narrator, and I really enjoy reading lots of books, especially imaginary ones.
Thank you. And Julia, what are your pronouns?
They, them.
Thank you. All right, next, Ada, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Ada Palmer. I'm a historian. I work on currently the history of censorship, and I'm also a novelist, best known for my Terra Ignota books, so science fiction and fantasy, and I also do Viking mythology-related music.
Would you mind sharing your pronouns as well?
Yeah, she is good, they, them is good. However, not forcing people to say their pronouns because some people are in unsafe conditions where they either have to lie or be in danger is also good.
I appreciate that. I know that as a moderator and for people in the Discord, I know I want them to be able to say, for instance, they or she made a good point. So, Marianne, would you mind going next?
I'm Marianne Mohenrad, she, her. I do a lot of different things, and my most recent book was a cookbook, Sri Lankan cookbook, A Feast of Serendib. My most recent science fiction thing was a book, The Stars Change. I also founded Strange Horizons, and I run the Speculative Literature Foundation, which gives grants to writers, and we'll be launching a podcast soon and a creative writing resource for writers and all kinds of good stuff. I'll drop a link in the chat. I think that's it.
All right. Would you like to share your pronouns also? Okay. No.
Oh, I did at the start.
Yeah,
I did.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Yes. I evidently have the attention span of a goldfish, which may come up later. Anne, would you mind going next?
Sure. Anne Gray. She is what I've mostly used, but they is just fine. And I am also lots of things. I'm an historian. I'm a systems design engineer and human factors analyst. I am a social justice activist and volunteer, and I'm also a substitute teacher and the mother of a 10-year-old girl. So yeah, that's, and more, you know.
I think everyone on this session is someone who has many attributes.
Polymath.
I think that's only if, is that something that one can call oneself, or is that something that it's like classy that you know you should really wait for other people to call you? So.
I grew up using Renaissance person.
I like jack of all trades and master of none.
When I do Renaissance person, it becomes a joke because I study the Renaissance.
Oh. Yeah. Jack of all trades, master of none. So.
I am Sumana Harihareshwara. Please use she and her for me. I am a project manager in the world of open source software, and happy to talk with people in Discord if you know an open source project that is stagnating and could use some roadside assistance to get it back on the road. And I am on the motherboard, the board of trustees for the Otherwise Award, formerly the James Tiptree Jr. Literary Award. And I am currently reading some Joanna Russ. That's real. So the Joanna Russ is this is meant to be a fun session with a lot of improv and banter. However, that only works due to extremely tight structure, which I will now explain to the audience. We have now had the very short intro by moderator. Check. Next, we will have a series of segments in which one person gives a description and a review of a book that does not artist. And then other panelists, we will all react and chit chat about that. And then I'll take a few minutes and look at the Discord, and we will see if there's any Q&A there that we want to talk about. And then we'll repeat for each of the presenters, and I'll be at the very end, and then we will wrap up. So I'm about to lower the veil and raise the curtain or something. So, okay. And now, fakery! Julia, you read an amazing book. I really can't wait to talk about the book that you're going to talk about with us. Go.
Yeah, so I know that a lot of us, like me probably, are looking for escape reading right now. I know I certainly have been doing a steady diet of that. One of my favorite books from last year was The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. And I was super excited to see that Alex had written a sequel together with Chuck Tingle, healing this timeline with the 10,000 doors of my butt. So I, of course, had to read that right away. I'm just going to read you the back copy. In the long, hot summer of 2020, November Average is down on his luck game show host, indefinitely furloughed from his job due to the pandemic. Who can't relate to that? Consumed by anxiety about COVID-19, global warming, and the upcoming US election, as are we all, I'm sure, November decides to take a big risk and go on a road trip through Vermont. I'll give him a pass because this is escapist reading. I would not do that personally. When his motorcycle breaks down, he finds himself stranded in a small town where the only thing open is an antique shop, whose window display has an old diary by one January scholar. November is intrigued by the book written by an author who shares his quirk of being named after one of the less popular months. But he's even more intrigued by the wear motorcycle Clancy, who runs the antique shop. When he reads the diary, though, he learns something even more intriguing. There are doors to alternate timelines everywhere, and his own butt is a major hub. Furthermore, Clancy knows exactly how to open it up by getting November to ride them. Can November and Clancy combine powers to bring healing to this timeline? So I gotta say, like, this was nonstop fun from beginning to end. I was not expecting to find it. It was exactly what I was hoping for. And I don't think it's really solved the world's problems, but it's brought healing to my timeline.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Julia. So when I read this book, as all of us did, because this is a book club, and as you know, Bob, when I read this book, I think what really moved me was that you could feel the collaboration really on a sentence by sentence level in the ways that the different pop culture references really went from sort of sub Rosa to super Rosa, as it were. Do you think that this is sort of foretelling, is this a harbinger of more Chuck Tingle collaborations to come? Because I don't think that we've really gotten to experience that much in his actual oeuvre, right? I'm sorry, auto captioner. That's, I think, OEUVRE. Julia, yeah, what do you think?
I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen a whole lot from him, but I know that Chuck Tingle, I think, was going to collaborate with Zoe Quinn on a game. So maybe he's opening the door to lots more. That would be exciting.
Anyone
Personally,
else?
I mean, I hate to be the naysayer in this, but in order to prepare for this panel, when I saw that we were going to be reading this book, I, of course, went back and reread all of the Chuck Tingle books before this one, because, I was trained at the University of Chicago, where Ada Palmer is now a professor, and we do our research, right? So, and unfortunately, there does seem to be a little bit of repetition of themes that's been going on more and more in his work. And I had high hopes that this collaboration would help break Tingle out of that and take him in a new direction, but he just went deeper. I think that's really all I have to say. He went so deep, really deep with this one.
I appreciate how all of us are making sure that we can skate right on the edge of what is family friendly at NASFiC in the, the early, like, prime time hours, right?
Well, and you know, when you approach any book, you can sort of take the view of just sort of staying on the surface curves of it, or like looking into where it has its depth. So,
And if you look into those curves and where it has its depths, in this case, you will go to 10,000 different timelines, because that's what happens.
Ada, do you have any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was approaching it. This is me again being U Chicago and also being in the middle of a book on censorship, which involves a lot of work on the Marquis de Sade and his aftermath. And there's a sort of recent trend in analyzing Sade's work mathematically, because he has these, and similarly to the repetitiveness of Tingle's work, right? He has these tendencies where he'll give a description of a sequence that's virtually just an equation of what is being added to what and what is being subtracted from what and where it is. So there are articles I've been looking at recently that have actually just actively translated it into the mathematical formulae and pointing out how sort of unnecessary the specific human being is to the act, because the focus is so much more on the act, or which of course is a hypothetical one. And so it's interesting, because in that, when people are looking at a historical text, the repetitiveness gets read as intentionality. The repetitiveness gets read as being sort of the point, and people talk about why it might be a commentary on how humans don't change over time, or that it might be interfacing with Lamettrie's man-machine thesis of like, we're just programmed, or we're really made out of mathematically locked
there's
atoms.
only so many times you can go into a butt.
Yeah, and the
might
question
all
of
be motorcycles,
you know,
actual machines.
And so there's this question of, is the repetitiveness actually that Tingle is working toward? You know, in his case, it might be in the multiverse kind of direction.
You're making me think that I've misread all of them, and I now know what I have to do next week is go back and read them again, right, with this possibility in mind.
Which, since you were trained at the U of Chicago,
who needs to sleep, really?
Because if you count the number of penetrations and turn that into a grid, you can get coordinates. Yeah. So
is this an ARG?
So the
is this
possibility,
an augmented reality game? Go ahead. Sorry.
There's the lattice of different universes, right?
Right. So it might be doing things kind of like the Brandon Sanderson, bringing multiple stories into one space.
Do you think an XY grid is going to be sufficient for mapping this complexity? Right? It's got to be.
Yeah. But I don't think
I think there is a polyverse of different interactions.
Which makes the idea of more collaborations more interesting, because by collaborating, he's also bringing other people's worlds into this. And it'd be interesting to see what is being inserted into what in terms of which collaborators he brings in.
Indeed. So before we break out the red twine, so that we can connect all these dots, I'll mention a few comments from the Q&A, and then we're going to go on to Ada, so that you can talk about the book that you decided to focus on today. So we're told that this is the shortest start to Chuck Tingle so far at this con. And we note also that this is a very penetrating analysis. So, oh yeah, since it's Chuck Tingle, it's an XXXXX-Y grid. So Ada, please go ahead. Tell us about the book that you're focusing on.
So I guess we're moving from to the far end of the spectrum on family friendliness. So of course, you know, I, like many, have been increasingly skeptical of the different Christopher Tolkien edited collections of things he's finding in his father's office that are farther and farther from feeling like anything that ever should have been published. So I think I shared, as you guys did, a lot of the skepticism when At Home in Middle Earth was announced, because when you read into it, it looked like it's just a collection of like Tolkien's notes on parenting, gardening, and cooking, kind of vaguely assembled with no clear connection to the fiction, especially because most of the notes seem to be years earlier. But I was, you know, I went in with very low expectations, which sometimes helps, but I was favorably impressed by, I guess it's the thoroughness, right? It's the degree to which you saw, it's like watching the roots of something. So there's that long sequence about the elm tree and then that red currant bush, and having to like continually transplant the red currant bush farther and farther away from the elm tree as it grew and shaded out more. And you're like, you can feel the Entwife narrative developing in his increasingly frustrated comments about how he can never get fruit out of the elderberry bush. And then some of the notes on like, and it feels like Christopher Tolkien for once kind of contributed in a really meaningful way, because when it lists things like these endless indexed lists of silverware and his tendency to assign dwarf names to all of the different bits of crockery in the house, having Christopher's sort of footnotes on what it was like being instructed to set the table with this stuff, it was both humanizing and, you know, weirdly felt like reading a historic text and thinking about a culture that could actually do that. And then some of the imaginary recipes, which I wish it was clearer which of these recipes are recipes that were actually tried in this mad kitchen and which of them were merely others. And especially the indexes about which dishes at different ages of Christopher growing up his father felt were appropriate for first breakfast or second breakfast while he was trying this 2 breakfast experiment. Anyway, so I thought it was lovely from a kind of slice of life direction, although I'd be really excited to hear some of Marianne as somebody who's just done a cookbook, your thoughts on the kitchen and cooking sections.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I actually wasn't even going to talk about those. I was going to talk about the gardening work. I'm hoping to do a gardening book in the future.
Ooh,
and
cool.
I've recently been reading Jamaica Kincaid's memoir, My Garden, which is, you know, you're probably familiar with Kincaid from her post-colonial work, like A Small Place and so on, these really quite biting fictional retellings of life in Antigua after colonialism. And in her garden book, you know, she again is talking in great detail about trees, flowers, etc. And you only slowly go to realize how much of it is still biting critique in a post-colonial frame. I mean, it really is. And I recommend it to everyone. And this to me seems like it's surprisingly effective in doing much of the same work. And I think when I read it, I felt like here finally was where Tolkien was able to make the critique of empire that he really had always wanted to make, right? And it had been there. It had been a little, you know, there's the bit at the end of The Lord of the Rings when you come back to the Shire, and that is very reminiscent of Conrad's Heart of Darkness, coming back to England and realizing the real darkness is in the heart. I mean, that's pretty obvious, I think, but I felt like this book took it a step further, right? And really, he was laying it all out there. And, you know, the passage with the bunnies, I thought made it very clear, very clear. So I have a new admiration for Tolkien and his willingness to go there.
Thank you, Marianne. Julia or Anne, do you have anything you'd like to?
Well,
go ahead, Julia.
Yeah. Go ahead. And
I was just thinking, you know, I mean, it is true that in a lot of literature, there have been analogies made with bunnies. And I think, you know, listening to you, I don't think I saw some things that now I'm thinking were in there.
Well, it's one of these funny questions where, because the scholarship has literally since Tolkien's birth flip-flopped 6 times on whether rabbits were invasively introduced into the British Isles by the Roman colonizers or not. And we keep finding new archaeological evidence that contradicts the other archaeological evidence, sort of flipping back and forth. And I would love to have a better chronology, to have a sense of like, are these bunnies a symbol of imperial power? It depends on exactly what year he wrote them. And while we can kind of index them vis-a-vis the increasingly elaborate cakes representing different places in Middle-earth that are described at the birthday party sequences in this, other than that, there's no real clear dating system to figure out what archaeological theory about bunnies he's working under when he describes these sort of dark, I mean, it reads a lot like the orcs, right? This sort of creature that originates in the deep and the underneath, the darkness and breeds.
Is it artificial or did it just evolve?
Right. Is this a
And
critique of
it's
Britain
not
or
just
of
that
Rome?
they're dark, it's that they're constantly reproducing, so you just can't get rid of them.
Mm.
I really wished when I was reading this that Peter Jackson had had a chance to read this before making the movies, because I felt like they were really missing a lot of the nuance that we would have gotten. Imagine, I mean, that line, you know, it comes in pints, that could have been stretched into so many different sizes given all of the different drinking vessels he described. And I think the bunnies thing plays into that as well. Like, imagine all of the different battle CGI sequences we could have seen with all of those bunnies.
I mean,
people think Watership Down is a downer.
Yeah. I mean, I could imagine a DVD extra where they had a CG rendering of every dish from Tolkien's kitchen, and you could, you know, pull them up one by one. I guess you could still do that online.
I think that this is as fascinating as this is. I do, because we have, you know, 5 of us, and we want to make sure that all of NASFiC gets to understand the glory of each of the books that we've brought to this. I'll mention there's a comment from Nyla, which is, it's the 100 years between transplantings that got to me. I mean, that's dedication, isn't it? Right. I wanted to check, is there anything that we want to talk about, what felt to me like the resonances between this work and Bunnicula? Right? Do we sense that perhaps there was some kind of Z factor there? Or?
I mean, yes, because they're both very strongly about bunnies and food. So I feel like that's and gardening plays into it, because of course Bunnicula only drains the juice of vegetables. So you can see how there's a clear path. I do kind of wonder if that was a direct influence.
Yeah, and it renders the vegetables unusable by anybody else, and that's
right, which is like colonialism, right?
Right,
draining the resources. Yeah.
But I would say, just like, this is going off into Bunnicula analysis, but Bunnicula is actually an immigrant, though. So this is the kind of story that's an anti-immigrant story, if you take it that way. But in a good way, Bunnicula actually does then embrace Bunnicula as an okay person. He's not a bad member of the family. But if you are going to be upset about the vampirism of vegetables and rendering them unusable, that could be saying, like, immigrants from Eastern European countries are taking our food and our livelihoods.
You know, I have to disagree with the idea that Bunnicula is an immigrant story. I mean, Bunnicula is white. And, you know, from a more Native American concept, you know, when the white imperialists first showed up, there was this thing of, oh, maybe they're nice, they bring some sort of positivity, we'll open our home to them, and then disaster, right? So it could be more subtle.
I think we can all agree that it's a complicated situation, and there should probably be an entire session elsewhere, possibly at FutureCon, which I hear is happening, or next year's WizCon, or one of these. It seems like these cons are really reproducing just, I can't really pick what's the metaphor I should but the colonialism of Bunnicula, or post-colonialism, or pre-colonialism, or adjacent to colonialism, that's something we could consider possibly at a different con. But I'd like to move on to Marianne and
just for a second before we move on. I think we all just have to rejoice in the sourdough epic, and the, you know, Christopher asking his dad every day, is there going to be bread? And his dad saying, it is not this day. And just the you know, which many of us who've been baking during the pandemic can relate to. So
absolutely, yes. Okay, so Marianne, please, what tell us about the book that you brought.
So I have to say, I need to preface this a little bit by saying that, you know, for decades, I was a very lazy writer. You know, all of these other writers would go off and research, right? They're going to go do the historical research, et cetera, so on. And maybe I would just too much research in my academic work. But when I was writing, I was like, oh, I'm just going to write stuff. It started to get to me, the guilt, right? So I did a deep dive into the library archives for my last book, and I stumbled across something that I could never have predicted. And I know you're dying to know the title, but I have to explain a little bit. So you know how there was, you know, the Earthsea trilogy, right? Which was 3 books by Ursula K. Le Guin, right? And then there was a 4th book, Tahanu, which she has a little trouble counting because a trilogy has three books in it. But But there's a fourth book. And even though, you know, my first encounter with Tahanu as a young person, I was a little upset that this was like, this is not the Earthsea I know, right? But I was clearly not mature enough for Tahanu at that point. And when I came back to it later, I was like, this is brilliant. This is amazing. I will forgive her inability to count. But then she comes out with a fifth book, Tales of Earthsea. Okay, so yeah, I mean, she's really, Le Guin is pushing it a little bit here. 5 is not 3, right? But they're short stories. Maybe it's all right, you know. Then decades pass and we get book 6 of the trilogy, The Other Wind, right? And you know, at that point you're like, well, whatever, she's a genius, she's brilliant. You know, they say that Einstein couldn't spell, Le Guin can't count, it's fine, right? So she is probably my favorite writer. It's hard because sometimes Octavia Butler is my favorite writer. So you guys can just imagine, I was down there in the archives and I found a 7th book of Earthsea, okay? And now I feel really bad for the people who recently brought out this amazing Books of Earthsea complete illustrated edition. Gorgeous. Charles Vest did these stunning illustrations for it. My husband gave it to me for a Christmas present that year, ensuring much happiness for him that Christmas season. And so, sorry, they're going to have to reissue it with book 7, which is titled, wait, I have it over here. Yes, Kalessin, an epistolary novel of erotic anthropology, the 7th book of Earthsea. And interestingly, it's a collaboration. It's an epistolary novel. So it is, in fact, a collaboration between 2 authors, Le Guin and Butler. I honestly, I had to take a little moment for myself in the stacks of, you know, the library. The Regenstein has seen quite a bit of activity in the stacks. I remember from my college days, and you don't necessarily have to have a partner for it when you are so inspired, right? So my only difficulty with this book, it's not easy doing you know, any kind of collaborative work where the voices really mesh, right? I write for Wildcards, and we do mosaic novels at times, and it can be tricky getting those voices to sound close. And if there's a failure to this book, I think that's where the failure is. Because whereas Butler's sections, and you can absolutely see the seams, I think. Tell me if you disagree, but I felt that Butler's sections, as we learned so much about the erotic potential of dragons such as Kalessin, were forthright, revealed quite a lot of interesting biology, as Butler is wont to do. And in fact, there's an interesting afterword that at one point they had thought of titling this Adulthood Rites, because it is about Kalessin's journey to adulthood, but Butler decided to use that for another book. So in any case, I just felt that Le Guin, she couldn't quite bring herself to go there, right? And so her passages were sensual, poetic, lyrical, but a little elliptical. You found yourself saying, well, wait, that's all very beautiful, but what actually happened between these people, right? And dragons. So anyway, that's my, I mean, obviously everyone should read it. The whole world should read it, but there's a little bit of a disconnect there.
All right. I appreciate the thorough rundown that you gave, Marianne. So we have maybe a few minutes for us to talk about.
I was so excited.
I'm glad. Clearly, this may be, out of all of the books that we've talked about here, the one that was most personally meaningful to the person who was able to bring it to this group. And I could really feel that when I read the copy. I believe you sent a hand annotated copy of this book to each of us. With like excited exclamation points, and I appreciated that, right? It really gave me, I felt like a sort of an annotated lens into the text. But what did other people feel?
Well, go ahead.
Go.
Okay. Well, this is really quick, but I honestly was really shocked at how well you could read the text of this to the music video for WAP.
It was, yeah. I mean, that only recently, right? It's sort of like, I've heard that a lot of mathematics is all like prefigured in Euler, you know? So I feel like, you know, when you see that WAP is sort of prefigured in Le Guin, that's the combination of Butler and Le Guin.
Yeah, I feel like Kalessin's journey, honestly, could have gone right into that mansion.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Ada, please go ahead.
Well, I was just actually, it might be too serious a question, but I was thinking, you know, clearly there needs to be a critical edition because I think it's a complex text.
Right.
And I think it needs to be read in the context because it's clear that they wrote it, you know, the first segments are more than a decade away from the latter segments. And so there were a lot of changes in the relationship between which stages of feminism were dominant and other stuff. So it feels like it really needs a critical edition. And I was wondering whether, because there's two voices in the central part, like clearly, Marianne, you should, you know, contribute to the critical edition, but whether it would make sense for there to be two annotators as well, and who you would want to partner with to be the second annotator in the critical edition so that the alternation of voices could be matched by an alternation of expertise as well. I don't know if that's...
You know, I honestly, I'm more of an enthusiastic amateur. I'm happy to hand over the critical edition to you.
Anne, I want to hear, Anne Gray, do you have any thoughts before we...
Well, you know, as I think about that possibility, you know, you could, Marianne, you're very sensual and kind of like Butler, as you were saying, like her writing really focuses on the connection between people, and you can just feel that friction in the book. Whereas Le Guin had a tendency, I think, to be more like up in the head and thinking about like the tensions of what could happen, should it happen, all these things. And so, you know, it might be interesting for you to play with trying to collaborate with someone who's actually less attuned to the body and and all that than you are. They would see different things.
Right, I can say, yeah, Marianne, you've written a lot about basically the things that we feel, right? In a you know, the things that we feel with our skin and our mouths and so on. So including the Feast of Serendip, right?
There we go.
Yeah, that's what I was going for.
There you go. Nice connection.
That's exactly. I mean, I don't know what you were talking about. So I also want to mention a few notes from our esteemed viewers. I esteem you, viewers. Which we are, of course, reminded of the increasingly inaccurately named Hitchhiker's Guide to Earthsea trilogy. I appreciate David Damerel saying that 7 was fair enough, but really, as much as we love Le Guin, she should have stopped before The Fast and the Fire Lord 10. And Nyla replies, but Earthsea the Revenge was really the best. All right, let's...
The odd ones are, you know, right?
That's what people say. That's what people say. So just to make sure we have room to really discuss, you know, coherently and cogently, all the books that all of us have brought to the table today. Anne, would you like to go?
Sure. I just wanted to say I really appreciate the patience with which everyone in the book club has accepted the fact that I'm mostly bringing YA because I'm just really trying to understand the field and pick things for my daughter to read as she gets more into that, you know, the actual novels. But I was very excited to share with you all this book from this past year. This was Nnedi Okorafor's first book in her series based in Wakanda, and I should say, okay, the title I keep forgetting is The Golden Crown. So and you know, I know when you read it, it's very fun. You know, it's kind of a prequel, right? Because it stars Ramonda, who was the queen mother of Shuri and T'Challa. So you know, and her youthful hijinks as a genetic scientist. So we just lost my video.
We can still hear you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your audio is speaking. Fine. Go ahead and keep speaking.
So I thought it was fun as she explored the possibilities of increasing sapience in the animals that they were going to use for different purposes in Wakanda, but also like I can't wait to see where she goes further in the series. with Ramonda's accidental introduction of the genetic material of the black-crowned crane into her own person. I mean, it out in the savannah, the black-crowned crane is of course a very regal bird, and you could. I feel like this is almost presaged by if you look at how Ramonda was depicted in the films. You could sort of see the hints at the fact that this was maybe in her backstory already, but just the way that it plays with, of course at a YA level, but things like how that having that bird genetics in her affected what her expectations were unconsciously for when T'Chaka came to court her and what she demanded that he do. I mean, that was just, it was so fun. And then I did see an interview with Nettie where she hinted that there's going to be a future book that in which we see how Shuri and her brother tried to take advantage of some of these maybe more crane-like tendencies of their mom to manipulate her, but how she was just able to soar above those manipulations. So I'd like to know what you guys thought of it.
All right, well, I gotta say, next month, guys, we have to read The Star-Touched Queen by Roxana Choksi, because there are so many similarities between the two books, and I really want to discuss it. In fact, the follow-up to this is A Crown of Wishes, and the crown thing is just, it's over the top. Next month, promise? All right, I'm not going to say anything else about this one because I want to wait.
I actually wanted to bring up one of the books that I thought we were potentially going to talk about was the anthology of short stories sponsored by Big Pharma. And I thought about bringing that in, and I just wanted to mention, I think that Zen Cho's dental themed piece in there about a treatment gone wrong, Torturer to the Crown, was it was really it was excellent. It was excellent. And I think that it's a shame that Nnedi Okorafor did not get a chance to, as far as I know, submit to that or get solicited for that anthology, because I think that understanding better what we could have learned from the Black Panther universe, right, in the Golden Crown would have been really excellent.
I mean, the Golden Crown could easily have been her own dental story. But I think that since Zen Cho had already submitted that, Nnedi knew that she needed to take that title and go in a different direction. So what we got was this really fun story. And I agree with what Anne said about the introducing the genetic material of the crane into her body accidentally, making her into a different person with the ability to literally soar. So that was really exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing more adventures in Wakanda just in general, because Black Panther was super great.
It was really great. Ada, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite sequence absolutely was definitely the starting to educate the kids while they're still in the eggs question, and how much can you communicate with and develop a rapport with an unborn or born but not born, right, kid who can hear you but doesn't yet have the ability to move around, and just the idea of then rereading the behaviors of both kids later through the lens of having had this not quite human transitional phase between first birth and second birth, I thought was, I mean, it was a short segment, but for me it just sort of lit up the whole thing.
Right. So Anne, if you have any further thoughts, then I want to hear them. Otherwise, I want to share, go into the next bits, because I unfortunately have to answer some questions about this anthology. I didn't realize it was going to be such a thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, okay. So I think we're all just sort of tiptoeing around it, but I'll just mention that Ada, I thought your story in the anthology, look,
I know it wasn't supposed to be horror, but
it was horror. It was horror. You wrote this horror piece about a dental treatment for children that is meant to strengthen teeth, but actually leads to distended jaws and aggressive behavior. I thought "To Like the Bitening" was just amazing.
Well, the thing is, I mean, the whole anthology, I couldn't, I never do short fiction, but one of my Bosch mates is a chemist in the pharma world. So like I literally multiple nights a week end up being kept up past midnight hearing stories about the latest bizarro big pharma thing. And so I couldn't stop thinking about this collection, which I guess impulsively assumed would be nothing but horror, because like that's how I think of big pharma, hearing the stories from the inside.
Well, I would say that I think certainly some of the pieces bucked, they were, really biting the hand that fed them in terms of, okay, big pharma, you're going to give me money to write a story. I'm going to come right back at you. But then I think there were some that were a little bit more kind of above the fray on just, classic, here is the effect of a particular scientific or engineering invention, right? Like I think Salman Rushdie's piece about a labor induction pill, you too can have Midnight's Children. I mean, that was, I think, just, classic kind of, SFF, or Kim Stanley Robinson's story about chocolate flavored antidepressants, Blue Mars Bar.
Yeah. And I know we're going to be thinking about, it was short, but the Delaney, which was practically just poetry all the way through, in which, what is this molecule that we're moving through like a helix? And it was fantastic.
It was pretty
I liked Sophie's Sunset Over the Cornfields as well. I mean,
we got to appreciate the carbon that everything comes from. Go ahead, Marianne.
Oh, well, I did my bachelor's thesis on Delaney. I don't know whether you guys know. I was a little obsessed with him and still am. And the thing that really struck me about this story was, he has this ongoing obsession with bitten fingernails, right? It's in all of his books. Yeah. In this piece, we finally get to see someone doing the biting and the emphasis on the teeth themselves, right? And it just felt to me like a culmination of something he'd been working towards for decades, right? So that was really exciting to me.
Great. So I want to start wrapping. I didn't really mean to get into that book because we had said, okay, there's already enough books, but I guess it really got to us. So I want to ask. Yeah. I want to ask briefly if I'll ask each of you to remind us of what the title of the book was. So Julia, what was the title of the Chuck Tingle?
That was Healing This Timeline with the 10,000 Doors of My Butt by Alex E. Harrow and Chuck Tingle together.
Thank you. Ada, what was the title of your book?
It was At Home in Middle Earth by J.R.R. Tolkien and Christopher Tolkien.
Great. Thank you. Marianne?
Kalessin, an epistolary novel of erotic anthropology by Ursula K. Le Guin and Octavia Butler.
And Anne?
It was The Golden Crown by Nydia Okorafor.
All right. So I'll close things out by talking about the book that I really was so excited that all of us got to talk about together. So, a lot of us have been excited about the new Netflix series of The Babysitter's Club. So if you wouldn't mind, Dave, sharing on your screen the cover of the book that I wanted us all to read, because I think all of us were really excited when we found out about the recently unearthed Babysitter's Club book by Isaac Asimov. He was really at the peak of his prolific powers, right, in the late 1980s. In 1988, he was tapped to be one of the rotating authors writing as Anne M. Martin. And this is Claudia and the New Robot. Yep. You can see that, this was the beginnings, right, of what was going to be a really interesting piece. You can see that they went in a slightly different direction than I might have. The subhead here is Claudia might give up the BSc and it's all the new robot's fault. And there's no indication that it's by Asimov, except that you see the small robot in the upper left-hand corner, indicating that this robot was going to be a continuing character, right? And that robot was in the upper left was going to be a signal that, oh, right, this is one of the robot books. You might think that whoever messily and hastily photo manipulated this accidentally left an extra robot logo in the upper left and did not notice this until after transmitting it to our Zoom host, Dave Hogg. That's a common misconception. Common misconception.
Well, so what I thought was so interesting about this, right, is so in the new Netflix series, one of the things we see in the very first episode is how much it is a critique of both gender and class, right? You have the relationship between the new dad figure, the girl who is very suspicious of him. There's a lot of interesting questions about what should the role of a father be? Do we need fathers anymore, right, in this new society that we're constructing? But then he empowers her to start up her own business, and it becomes this sort of capitalistic, I don't know, almost or I don't want to use orgasmic, but do you know what I mean, right? So
I want to mention, though, for the people who haven't read the book, I want to talk a little bit about what happens in it, which is that Claudia's older sister Janine develops a robot that can babysit in order to have it join the club.
Right.
And I think that had some Babysitter's Club in so many ways played to Asimov's strengths because it's got such a very strong repeating structure, what some might call a formula, but I mean, so do the Black Widower's mysteries and the Susan Calvin robot stories and the Azazel stories.
And he was always so good at developing that sort of emotional connection between people and robots. So
yeah. And this book had some of the most three-dimensional, well-rounded characters of Asimov's entire career. And so I think the fact that it stretched him to write almost entirely from the perspectives of girls was really helpful. I mean, you get these babysitting diaries told from the robot's perspective in fixed width font, which I think was very effective. I love that, he came up with the idea of the kid kit actually containing materials and plans for babysitters to actually build new kids, which is really what it should be. But Marianne, I want you to go on and talk about capitalism.
No, but this actually, I think what you're saying fits really well, right? Because when she invents that robot, I feel like it creates a link to Ian Banks, right? To this future of basic income. We don't, we're not going to need to set up a club to earn money anymore. The robots will take care of any necessary babysitting. So then what is the purpose of the club? It's not about capitalism now, right? So it's really revolutionary. I think.
It is. Please, I think, Julia, you had.
Yeah, I have to disagree there, because I think if you read it, you'll see that the robot is very concerned with following the 3 laws. And this is one of the main sources of conflict between the robot and Claudia. Of course, Claudia and Janine have their own issues, which we see throughout the books. But of course, Janine would design a robot that has this obsession with laws and following them. And Claudia is much more a chaotic personality. So this is a very big conflict. The thing is, though, both of them have some good points as babysitters and some downfalls because of their personalities. And since this robot has been programmed by Janine, it's effectively, if Janine were a babysitter, the robot is thinking more about its own existence, how to create more kids like it in its image, having enlisted the other children to actually help with those kid kits. And I don't know that that's actually helping those kids develop well emotionally or physically. Witness the point in chapter 5 where the robot completely forgets to feed the kids dinner.
Yeah. And this is all just partly because of the second law tweak, right, where it doesn't realize about what it is that will allow things to come to harm. Anyway, but Ada, Anne, did you have any thoughts?
I mean, I guess I'm sort of stuck on that. Like, I understood what he was doing with that. You sort of can't not spoil when you're having a book club discussion, right? I understood,
please.
I think, what he was doing with the chapter 7 reveal, where like, this isn't the original Babysitters Club, we're 37 million years in the future and they've been resurrected by cyclical time. Like, that actually was set up decently by some of the random notes that the robot had been making on the back of paper, but I couldn't figure out why they were in Australia now. Like, it's 37 million years in the future. Everything else is the same except Australia. And I'm like, was it setting up a next book that didn't?
Just like so many dystopias set in Australia. I think it's just like an American thing.
No.
This was
period. Isaac Asimov wanted to write a super special. He didn't want to write regular Babysitter's
Yeah.
Club number 12. He wanted to write a super special, and he wanted it to have a spinoff. And I think he just couldn't play as well with Scholastic as he thought he could. So we only have a few minutes. We have a minute and a half left. So at this point, I am going to change, like lower the curtain and raise the veil. So thank you all. My gosh, that was a lot of fun. I really appreciated getting to do that with all of you. So do we have any final thoughts about actual books that people should actually write?
Well, spinning off the Isaac Asimov Babysitters Club thing, I have to admit that this conversation reminded me of I've been to some interesting seminars on just how the basic human needs are not like the things that you see in the hierarchy of needs. They're actually like a sense of purpose and a sense of connection to other people, and that's how we get through trauma and things like this here. And so, I'd love to see more books that actually like explore that as people's sense of purpose rather than reproduction, like making a whole bunch of children robots that are just like you.
One of the things I genuinely love about Babysitter's Club is that it's about a community of practice around care work. Go ahead, Marianne.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I want people to appreciate that I have a dragon stole in honor of my book, and this is made by Peacock Felt on Etsy, and I love it to pieces. So
that's really wonderful. Okay, we're probably about to quote self-destruct, so let us all.
My last recommendation is just for my university, I developed a bunch of very well-researched self-care and healthy work habits for COVID documents, which are up on my blog, publicly available, exurbe.com, exurbe.com. It's the most recent post. So anybody who likes them, please download them. The only restriction on sharing them is when you share them, tell people to share them more.
Thank you. Julia,
Thanks,
do you have any
everybody. No, this was great. Thank you all.
All right.
all right.
I'm just waving. Bye.
Bye,
Thank
Priscilla.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Okay.
Dragon Stole.
All right, and there we go.
That was great.